So I tried to see if I could find any of my old history books or any just history books that I had in general to put in the background, considering I am going to talk about history to a degree in this video. But I couldn't find any, and I was just like, I don't remember if I even still have any, because I remember I would sell them back to the college for not nearly as much as I paid for them, which is kind of stupid, but you know. Oh well. So, so this video is going to be about the archaeologists of Ohara. So, I had the thought the other day when I'm just like looking through other stuff for One Piece, and like I was looking through the different episodes, you know, getting images and stuff like that, screen caps and things for me to use in videos, and I'm like, well, you know, the archaeologists of Ohara are actually pretty damn awesome. They're actually pretty badass. Once you kind of stop and think about it. So I just kind of wanted to do a video where I talk about that. I know other people have probably done videos, you know, where they talk about the archaeologist to a degree. I've done at least one video where, for the Mother's Day video for One Piece for last year, where I talked about Olvia and Robin and their relationship, and I think I may have talked about Olvia and like something else at some point in time as well, but I wanted to do a video where I just kind of talk about the archaeologists as a whole, for like that organization, or the Demons of Ohara as they're called, or they're also called, and just like why I think they're just so awesome and badass and amazing and whatever other adjective you want to throw in there. So for a brief history of Ohara itself, we know that Ohara, the centerpiece of the island, was this giant tree of knowledge, which is of course a reference to the Bible, the tree of knowledge of good and evil and such, that's in the, you know, in the Garden of Eden and everything, that, you know, Adam and Eve eat the fruit from and everything. Probably pomegranates, not actually apples, but moving on. We know that this tree was planted about 5,000 years ago, and that for the longest period of time, it was like one of the oldest living things on the planet of One Piece, whatever you want to call the planet. And so we know that it was, you know, has been around for an extremely long time. It's located on the island of Ohara, and over time, as it grew, at some point in time, it ended up being converted into this giant library, and was kind of this like cache of all of the world's knowledge, or like a huge amount of the world's knowledge. And considering the fact that the tree has been around for 5,000 years, and that the Void Century happened, you know, 900 to 800 years ago, you know, this tree was around a long time before then, and considering how big it is, it probably held a lot of information even before then. We don't know exactly when it got turned into a library, like once it, you know, how large it would have had to have been, you know, it depends on how quickly it grew and everything, and how quickly people like ended up living on the island and everything. You know, but, you know, for a good amount of time, people lived on the island, because we know that the island was well known for its archaeologists and its historians and everything. And from what we hear throughout the course of like the 4 episodes that this, you know, whole little epic takes place on, where we get Robin's flashback, which I literally just rewatched over the last 2 days, so I would have a lot of this fresh in my mind. In regards to, you know, the archaeologists themselves and everything, not just Olvia and Robin, but the other archaeologists like Clover and such. And, you know, so from what we understand is that, like, you know, at some point, you know, probably, you know, after, you know, during the Void Century, at some point, you know, the world government, because we know that they probably did this great amount of like getting rid of a lot of this information about the Ancient Kingdom. We don't know when the Ancient Kingdom arose, but, you know, when it started, but we know that they probably went to Ohara at some point, and probably ended up gathering up a bunch of the information about this country and getting rid of it, or taking it back to Marijois to keep an extremely safe place for only the Gorosei and Im-sama to have any form of information on, or whatever the Im-sama was at that point in time, was probably what happened. And what we kind of, you know, what we can probably infer is that, you know, after that, they kept a very close eye on the archaeologists, probably for like maybe 1 or 2 generations, they're just like, you can't study the poneglyphs, you can't study any of that stuff. Just forget about the Void Century. Just don't even think about it. And such. And, probably, we're influential on like figuring up some of the history books and stuff like that, because the world government, whatever form of schooling goes on in the One Piece world, whatever schooling there is for those that can afford it, because we know there are schools, but for the ones that can actually afford it, it's probably quite government regimented in regards to what the students are allowed to learn, particularly in history books. And such. And we know that at the very least in the more recent generations, particularly within the last, 20 some years, before everything happened, with Robin's flashback and such, that generation became very interested in being able to decipher the poneglyphs. We know that there was a poneglyph on the island of Ohara. Whether that was a poneglyph that was brought to the island at some point in time, we don't know, or if that was like, Joy Boy and his, allies or whatever, they entrusted Ohara with this poneglyph and like they just kept it hidden from the world government for the past 800 years. We don't know. But, something along those lines can be inferred that somehow the archaeologists of Ohara got their hands on a poneglyph. And from there, they worked on studying it. They worked on scrounging up whatever information they could probably find within the books that they had within their library, and even other libraries around the world. And since they were archaeologists, and, Ohara was renowned for their archaeology, and, kind of what we can infer is that, like, they probably went around to different places around the world, because we know that they went on different archaeological, I can say the word, expeditions at various points in time and such. And during that time frame, they probably gathered up any other little scraps of information they had. Maybe at some point in the past, one of them had ended up on, in various islands in the Grand Line. We don't know. And maybe for all we know, they had an interaction with like Nolan at some point in time, 400 years ago when Nolan was still alive. There's a possibility there. We don't know when they started their poneglyph research. But throughout that course in time, we kind of learned that, eventually these different, the archaeologists started to learn more and more, and they started to learn about the ancient kingdom. And from what we can infer, they started to figure out, like, it's inferred that they actually figured out the name of the ancient kingdom. And of course, as the fan base, we think, the ancient kingdom must be like where Laugh-Tale is or something like that. So, that's what, like, Roger named it Laugh-Tale, but maybe what it is like Clover knew the actual name of the kingdom. And then, of course, things happen, which I'll get to. But what we just kind of see about the archaeologist throughout the course of like the 4 episodes or the couple of chapters or so that we get for Robin's flashback is, we see that Robin had made her, that when Robin was a little kid, after her mother had left to go on her archaeology or her, expedition and everything to study more about the poneglyphs, we know that Robin eventually ended up finding her way to the library. And when she was there, first she meets Clover, and she thinks he's just going to be this really angry old man, but he's not. He's actually really sweet to her. And, he ends up, showing her, having her say, well, you can take as many books as you want. It's a library. It's free. You can read however many books you want. And we just see how happy that makes Robin. We know that for, she's about 2 when her mom leaves, and she's 8 when she returned. So there's about 6 years in there. She probably didn't end up at the library right away, but she ended up there eventually. And in that time frame, she learned so much more about reading and so much more about history. And we know that, we of course find out that during that time frame, she ended up actually getting her archaeologist medal or something like that. She took like a doctoral exam or something like that, I guess, at the age of 8 and passed, which, I mean, eat your heart out, Doogie Howser. Any other kid genius, just, look at what Robin did. So we have that. And, so we see a lot of that happens, and we see just how happy all of the archaeologists are for Robin when she shows up, when they give her her medal, when they give her her giant, big surprise. It's just like, you passed, and, just like how happy they are. We know that at some point in the past, they probably threw her at least a couple of birthday parties, because her aunt and her uncle and her cousins surely didn't. Most definitely did not. Well, her uncle may have tried, but her aunt was just horrible, which I talked about it in a different video. But what we end up seeing throughout the course of, through that flashback, we see how much they really care about Robin. But then she mentions that, just like, so that means that I can now start, studying the poneglyphs with you. I want to study about the Void Century. And they're just like, oh, Clover's like, no, you cannot do that. You cannot learn about that. That is wrong. That is illegal. You cannot do that. And from Robin's, of course, point of view, she's looking at it as, but I did all of this stuff, and I studied, and I learned all of this, so why aren't you letting me be a part of this? That's all I ever wanted. I just don't want to be alone anymore. And, of course, we find out later on, through, whatever, from what Clover says to the other archaeologists and such, he's like, no, I don't, it's like, I'm trying to protect her because, well, he's trying to protect her because he cares about her, just like he cares about Olvia and the rest of his archaeologists. And it's just like, it's one thing for the adults that have a better understanding of what's going on. Robin is 8 at this point in time. She does not quite realize the seriousness of the situation that she has gotten herself into, with the fact that she can read, well, she hasn't said that she can read the poneglyphs yet, but with the fact that she wants to study the poneglyphs and study the Void Century. And, he's trying to keep her safe in that regard. Throughout the next couple of days, that's when Saul shows up on the beach and everything, and Robin finds him, and Saul apparently is not quite clicking in the right places because his brain's not firing on the right synapses, because he doesn't quite figure out fast enough that Robin says that, oh, well, we have archaeologists here, different things like that. I'm like, okay, Saul, you're in the West Blue. How did you not figure this out fast enough? But we don't know exactly how long he's been in the West Blue trying to escape, but he ended up on Ohara. And, from what we see after that, we get this mention of, that Robin's mother, we saw her poster, in regards to her bounty poster and such. And we know that Olvia returns to the island, and she makes her way to the library, where she informs everybody, all the rest of the archaeologists and Clover and such, that are just like, okay, so here's what happened. The government found a research ship, and they basically killed everybody that was on it, and I was the only survivor. And she's like apologizing for that, for the fact that she was the one that survived, but nobody else did. And her, Clover and the others are like, it's fine. It's fine. It's not your fault. We all knew that this was a possibility. We all knew that, even though you left and went on this part of the research, we were still here and doing research here. So we're all still part of the same team and such. And, I think Clover mentioned something about, like, Robin's gotten so big, and Olvia's like, I can't let her become the child of a criminal. I can't let that happen. And we know that Olvia, in an attempt to try to, like, protect the other archaeologists, first of all, they have guns hidden in the library, which I just find hilarious. And she takes one of them and she runs off to go and confront Spondine, who is most definitely Spondam's father in the way that he acts, but he's at least somewhat smarter than Spondam. I'll give him that. Not that that's saying much, but, I don't know how he got into the position he got into in the first place. Maybe he has Buggy's luck of failing up. But, we know that she shows up, and that she ends up actually trying to, she tries to shoot him, which, I mean, even if she shot him, it probably wouldn't have done a whole lot to change anything that happened in the story, unless she was somehow fast enough to also shoot the other 2 agents that were there that were from CP9, but that's very unlikely to have happened. But, she tries to deny that she has any connection to Ohara, to the archaeologist. And, Spondam doesn't, Spondam is like, no, I'm not. Spondine is like, I'm not buying that. And, they use one of the Rokushiki techniques on her to like knock her out or whatever, so she can't incapacitate her, and then they drag her back. And of course, at this point in time, a bunch of the other government agents have shown up at the library, and they've, since rounded up all the archaeologists, and they're sitting outside, and Robin's there with them. And I think they're either the other agents are just like not paying any attention to the 8-year-old child that is there, or they're just not seeing her as a threat because she's a child, which is, kind of true. Given how much the agents probably have their heads up their butt, I wouldn't be surprised if they look at this little girl and don't see her as any form of a threat. But so, she's 8, she's fine. She was probably just getting a picture book from the library or something. How wrong they are. And throughout that interaction, Spondine shows up and he drops Olvia on the ground and everything. And, Olvia sees Robin and she's just like, oh, she's gotten so big and everything. But she's like trying not to say anything. And, Clover and the others see that Olvia has been captured. And we get this moment where, the Gorosei call on the Denden Mushi. And then, of course, Clover's just like, let me speak to the Elder Stars. Let me at least tell them what we've found out. And of course, via things that, Spondine says, we're able to, well, he just kind of straight up says it, that it's just like, oh, well, finding you guys here and, finding evidence of like you having a poneglyph is like, it's just preliminary. It's just like, we're already plan on doing a buster call on the island and everything, because we know that the different warships have shown up and everything with the different vice admirals on them. And what we end up seeing is, and we end up learning that, like, no matter how many times they ended up killing other archaeologists, different, expeditions of archaeologists, and, the government ended up killing them and everything, that more and more kept coming, and eventually they kept trying to find, like, a connection to Ohara, and they eventually were able to do that via Olvia. And, we learn this through the flashback that we get with Saul, where, like, Saul kept saying, it's just like, well, they don't, none of them want to, none of the archaeologists want to, seem to want to get any of, they just want the history. They don't want to learn anything about the ancient weapons, or they don't want to revive the ancient weapons or anything. And, Saul, of course, he ends up finding out that they're going to do a buster call, and he ends up, helping Olvia escape. And of course, they both end up on Ohara and everything. And we see the relationship build between Robin and Saul, which is just adorable. But, with the laughing, the den is she. And one of the other things that we see, or what happens is, or what is revealed is that, Clover ends up talking to the Gorosei. And he's like, we've put together so much information about, the ancient kingdom from what we've been able to, like, scrap together and everything. Would you like to hear the name of the kingdom? And that's where they have him shot. And, during this whole time frame, they keep trying to tell Robin to run, go to get on one of the evacuation ships. She's not an archaeologist. She's a kid. She doesn't know anything. It's what they're trying to protect her and everything. And the other archaeologists are like in the same boat where they're trying to protect Robin. And, throughout this time, the Robin had kind of like run off, and she had actually ended up hearing some of what Clover was saying to the Gorosei. And then, of course, in this time frame, when she sees her mother, after Clover gets shot, she finally sees Olivia and, like, recognizes her for, that, oh, this is Olvia, this is my mother. And what ends up happening is, of course, we get the very tearful moment where Robin is just like, it's me, Mom, it's Robin. I know I got big, but, like, I studied really hard, and I can read the poneglyphs. And we see the looks of horror on Clover's face, on the other archaeologist's face, on Olvia's face when she hears that. And even on Spondine and the other agents' faces, just like we see that look of horror of like, oh, this child can read the poneglyphs. That's not good. and such. And, so we have that whole moment. We have the moment between Robin and Olvia where they end up finally hugging and everything. And, you know, the point that I kind of want to get across is just how awesome the archaeologists are. They kept getting swatted down like flies by the world government, by the Marines, and yet they kept doing their research. For 800 years, well, like 700 and like 80 some years or whatever, they continuously were able to keep secret that, like, somewhere in that time frame, not only did they get their hands on a poneglyph, but that they learned how to read it, that they were able to decode at least what that poneglyph said and try to find other poneglyphs, that they were able to gather up any of this information that they'd been able to find and use it to try to piece together what happened during the Void Century. I would not be surprised at all. Maybe not if they knew all the names of the different weapons, possibly, but that wasn't what they were interested in. But maybe they knew about Joy Boy. Maybe they didn't necessarily know about, like, the Nika fruit and all of this other stuff that happened, but maybe they knew somewhat about Joy Boy. Maybe they had some information about Wano. Maybe there was something about, like, Zoe in those books. We don't know. Because, of course, during all of this, they end up blowing up the library and, of course, setting parts of it on fire, which, of course, result in the books being caught on fire. And, of course, Clover sends the other archaeologists back into the library to, like, start throwing the book, getting the books out, and, like, they throw them into the lake and everything. I don't think it's ever stated what happens to those books, because, like, even after the Buster Call's finished and everything, all the books are, like, in the lake. Or, like, a ton of the books are in the lake. And I highly doubt Spawn Dean cared enough to try to, like, go, send a bunch of his people into the lake to, like, get the books out and, like, try to see what could be salvageable, because they just want the knowledge to disappear. So that would make sense if they just left the books in the lake, because it's just like, well, they'll eventually just, rot away in the water or whatever. Which, by technicality, is true. They will eventually just get, all the ink and the pages and everything will just get destroyed in the water. But, there's that. But, I highly doubt that they went through and, like, dug out any of the books out of the water. That's never stated or anything like that. Plot hole that, of course, Oda can always exploit if he wishes to. But what, of course, we see is how much, throughout that time frame, Saul shows up and he grabs Robin. Olvia's like, get my daughter out of, off this island, get her away from here. And, Saul turned against the Navy in order to try to help Olvia. That already says something. Well, I guess that says more about Saul necessarily than Olvia, but still. And throughout that time frame, we have it, throughout that flashback, those moments where we see the Buster Call starting, where they have, all the different ships being fired, firing at the island and blowing everything up. And, of course, we see, Robin tries to get to the coast, and, everybody on the ship is just like, oh, well, or a bunch of the kids, oh, don't let her on the ship. She's a demon child. And, like, Spawn Dean's like, don't let her on the ship. She's, I don't know. She's not helpful. She's, she can read the poneglyph. She's a demon. Because the archaeologists end up being referred to as the demons of Ohara. And throughout that course, throughout those moments, we see, Saul shows up again and grabs her and, like, tries to run her back, tries to get her to a different area so we can, like, put her on his raft that he made and get her off the island. And, he's trying to protect her, and, of course, he's being fired upon by the Marines. And we also see during this moment, we see that, Sakazuki, who's Vice Admiral at this point in time, fires at, the civilian ship and blows it up, with him stating that, we can't even risk, one person, one archaeologist happens to be on that ship. We can't even risk that. And, everything that we see throughout the course of those episodes, Saul getting Robin to the coast and ends up getting stopped by Kuzan, and, and then Kuzan, of course, letting Robin go and letting her sail off in the little dinghy rowboat and everything. The whole speech that we see Saul give and everything to her about friendship and everything. And I want to, and as I said, I just wanted to point out how awesome the archaeologists are. We see how kind they are to Robin, how encouraging they are to her, even if they are trying to protect her against trying to learn about the Void Century. They're very protective of her in that regard, too. They just wanted her to leave so she could try to get on the ship. Probably a good thing she wasn't on the ship to begin with, because she is a devil fruit user, and she gets on the ship, and the ship goes boom, and she gets sunk in the water, that type of a thing. So that was probably a good thing that she wasn't on the ship. But, the archaeologists were so awesome that, just to stop the information that they had gathered from being shared with the rest of the world, the world government, the Gorosei and CP9 shoot Clover. Doesn't kill him because he's still in the library when everything's being burned all around them and destroyed and everything, but it's assumed that at this point in time he's dead, because we hear after the Buster Call's finished, the CP9 agents go back to the island and look through everything, and it's assumed that all the different archaeologists were killed and everything. Although, again, if they wanted to do something where it's just oh, well, Olvia survived this, I'm sure that there's something that could be done with that to be oh, maybe there was a secret room inside of the tree that Clover put Olvia in or something like that. I don't know. And, so there's that option, but then there's, Clover is most likely dead. Most of the other archaeologists are most likely dead. Olvia is dead, and all of them are burned. All of them are dead. The library gets burned. They blow up the civilian ship. They do nothing to do anything with the books that are now sitting in the lake. They've destroyed an entire island just to make an example out of Ohara in regards to studying the poneglyphs, which already just tells us how important the poneglyphs are and how important the knowledge on them is in regards to the fact that Robin can read them, which of course is iterated multiple times throughout the rest of the series. And then, just because they are still so freaking terrified of this knowledge getting out, they put a 79 million bounty on the head of an 8-year-old girl. All because of the fact that she said that she can read the poneglyphs. They put this bounty on her head, and for the next 20 years, give or take however long it took her to get to Baroque Works, because I don't remember exactly how long that took, but Robin is on the run. And if you just want even more evidence to show you how freaking awesome the archaeologists are, just look at Robin in general. Everything that she went through as a kid, she took it with, she had this huge chip on her shoulder, and everything that happened with her when she was a kid, with all of the bullies on the island, with her freaking aunt, with all that stuff. How much she endured to, just living on the island in general. And then, and then after that, she's on the run for, 15, 16, whatever years. She gets betrayed again and again by all these people that seem to want to help her. And she's just trying to get, work to be, to get food and shelter and everything. And they keep betraying her again and again and again to try to get the bounty on her head. And she just keeps running and running and, making deals with other organizations and other pirates and all this other stuff. And eventually, yes, she ends up in Baroque Works. And then everything that we see that happens during, the Alabasta arc and everything. And everything that happens with, her trying to stop Crocodile to a degree. And then she joins the Straw Hats. And just we see how awesome and how much she loves history and everything that happens with, with Skypiea and everything. And, even after that, there's, those episodes that we get where it's her flashback lead up to her moment of, I want to live, where she's finally accepting the fact that it's her mother wanted to live. The other archaeologist wanted her to live. Saul wanted her to live. Aokiji, Kuzan, who was her enemy at the time, still let her escape because he wanted to see what she would grow into. And, we see all of that, and he's even letting her leave. And, her friends want her to live. The Straw has it. She's found that are these friends that Saul said she would find that would stay with her and be with her. And we just see how awesome Robin has gotten. And we just see, you just want evidence for how freaking badass and awesome and amazing the Ohara scholars were. Just look at everything Robin's accomplished. And at this point in time, she's found 3 of the road poneglyphs. She's read them. She's found other poneglyphs. She's read about, Pluton and Neptune, or Pluton and Neptune, that was wrong. Pluton and Poseidon, and, has some idea of Uranus, but not too much. And we've seen all this. And we've just seen how awesome she's become over the years with more training she's done. Now she's got like this giant freaking awesome demoness form that she can turn into, that she used to defeat Black Maria and everything. And just like how much she's grown. And yes, it starts off as a video about like how awesome the archaeologists are, but you can't talk about how awesome the archaeologists are without talking about Robin, because she is the epitome of everything that they had learned. And yeah, she doesn't know everything that they knew at that point in time, but she's going to find out. And we know that at some point in time, when we do finally reach Laugh Tale and we see Robin, however the true history is laid out, where we see this, this history of the Void Century, and where we learn about everything in the ancient kingdom and everything. When that happens, since I haven't really talked too much about that, when that happens, I'm gonna like it. I'm gonna be very happy if they end up throwing something in where like we see Robin standing there reading it to the Straw Hats, because it's probably gonna start off with like Robin standing there and like reading everything to the Straw Hats, and then it'll shift into like, like a several chapter like flashback where we learn more about Joy Boy and like the Nika fruit and the Noah and the world government and like Eam Sama and everything, and like where we learn so much about that. But I'm gonna like if like we get like this transition moment where we cut back to Robin remembering what she heard Clover say on that day on the island, where it's like him talking about the kingdom. And when she reads the name, we get this moment, where she finally reads the name of the kingdom. If this happens before we go into the flashback setup, if we see this visual image of, this ghostly image or something like that, or like her remembering what Clover said, and like him not getting to finish what he was going to say before he got shot. And her, like, I now know what it was that Clover wanted to say on that day, and like learning about the kingdom. And, maybe there's this moment where like after she's read the true history and like explained it to the Straw Hats, because like if Robin didn't care about the true history, Luffy would not give a flying flip. But because Robin cares, he will listen to her explain it. Nami and Usopp and even Frankie would probably be interested. Chopper to a degree also. Sanji, maybe. Jinbei definitely would probably be interested in, the true history and everything. Zoro would probably fall asleep, but, Luffy would listen because it means something to Robin. And, we would probably get this moment where we, what would be a very nice image of like after it, of like Robin after she's finished reading the poneglyphs, and we like cut out of the flashback and get back to the Straw Hats. Maybe we'll get like a montage thing, or like maybe this will be something they do more in the anime, where we get like this montage thing where we kind of see what looks like Clover as, him when he's younger or something like that, reading stuff about the ancient kingdom as like the history was passed down through, what was remained of the history was passed down through Ohara, through the archaeologists and everything. And maybe we'll see something with Clover there. That would be a very nice tie back into what's going on. Even if it's just a tiny little filler thing that they throw in the anime, that would be an okay piece of filler to throw in there, of like seeing Clover talk about that, or like seeing Clover have that information. That would be nice. I would be okay with that. But like if we could just get this image where we have Robin after she's read the poneglyphs, and because she's finally to a degree achieved part of her dream of learning about it, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Robin crying in that regard too, which would be fine in this regard, because it's not weakness crying. And there's different types of crying obviously, but it's Robin crying because she's finally achieved not just part of her dream, but she's achieved what her mother and Clover and the other archaeologists had been trying to do for so long. For 22 years at this point in time, she's been running, even with the Straw Hats and everything, she'd been running. And now she can finally say that she knows what had happened. And, yeah, there might also be some, laughing in there too, because it's called Laugh Tale. but we would get this, hopefully get this great image that I would love. Again, if it's filler, I don't care. If it's like fan art someone makes of like after Robin's read all of this, we get like this ghostly image of like her standing there. And, you know, if we get this image of like her mother and Clover and the other archaeologist like behind her, like, I finally figured it out. I finally learned the truth. And this is what it is. And we get that, or if like in a prologue bit we see where she, or epilogue or whatever, where she ends up maybe going back to Ohara and ends up like going back to there where she hasn't been in 22 years or whatever. And she sits there like in the ruins of like where the library had used to be, and just sits there and she like talks to the ruins and tells them what she learned and says, this is what happened. I would love that. I would love, love, love if they did that. I have no idea if that's something they're going to do, but I would look at that as like this great little full circle thing that they could do with Robin and with the archaeologist, because they meant so much to her and they sacrificed so much in order to try to not just help her escape, and like Saul did the same thing, but to like prove that they chose the right thing, that they wanted to protect her, and that shows that it's like, you know, the history of Ohara didn't just end with them, that it lived on with Robin. And I would love that. And I hope that's what they do in the manga. If they just do that in the anime for like some adorable filler, I would be perfectly okay with that type of filler, because like that's filler that makes sense, and it's filler that is poignant and has a purpose, and I would love that. I have no idea if that's going to happen, but that's, I wanted to point that out. I wanted to do a video where I talked about the archaeologist, and it shifted into talking about Robin and then into her dream and what might happen, but I wanted to do that video. And that's what we have, and I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have your own thoughts, please comment, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. The past belongs to all men. Nobody has the right to try and stop the desire to know the untold history. Whatever the past may be, as long as it's history crafted by the hands of mankind, we have the responsibility to accept it all. If one is able to understand this without fear, countermeasures will be possible whatever happens.